Hey, thanks for joining me. In this video, we're going to take a look at the Pecron PV300 portable solar panel. It's a bit of a beast. It's kind of forcing me into a corner here. But despite the PV300 model number, it's actually rated for 330 watts output. And as you may or may not be aware, I've reviewed a couple of Pecron power stations over the course of the past year, this E2000 LFP being one of them. And I have found these things to be extremely well-made, solid options in the portable power space, and they remain among my favorite power stations in their respective capacity classes. So let's find out how this particular solar panel performs, kind of who and what power stations it's best suited for, and if it lives up to the quality reputation of the E2000 LFP. All right, jumping right into the specs, the current price on this panel is $599 on Amazon or from Pecron.com direct. If you do buy it from Pecron.com direct, there is a discount code that I put in the video description below for an additional 10% off that price, and that gets the price down to about, I think, $539, I believe. So this is a monocrystalline panels rated at, as I said, 330 watts output under ideal conditions. We typically get a little bit less than that. And the panel weighs just a hair under 29 pounds. So it's a little bit on the heavy side, but that's actually not a bad thing since it gives the panel, theoretically, much more stability in breezy conditions, and it's much less likely to get blown over. So the folded dimensions, as you kind of see it right now, are 34.6 inches wide in this direction, 24 inches in this direction, and about 2.5 to 3 inches thick. Unfolded, it's a full 92 inches long, and you'll see that in a little bit. And that's over 7.5 feet long, but it still remains 34.5 inches high. So the important output specs on this that you need to be aware of are the open circuit voltage, which is 39.6 volts. And the short circuit current rating on this, or ISC rating, is 12 amps. Now, as you'll see, this is a 4-panel fold-out design, which is typical with these higher capacities. And it's got an adjustable leg for each panel to give it, the maximum stability. There's no direct connect DC port module in the cable pouch as there are on some of the smaller capacities, but that's actually not all that common in these larger capacity panels. Now, the connector cable that's integrated here is a very heavy gauge, very long, actually 16-foot long cable that terminates to standard MC4 solar connectors. So that makes it very easy to connect this panel in series with other similar panels or in parallel if you add a couple of branch adapters. All right, so we can't really review a solar panel with going outside, can we? So let's cut to some testing that I did while the weather was cooperating. All right, we are coming up on noon, and it is a sunny-ish with a lot of little spotty clouds that have moved, kind of moved in and out. So we're gonna see what kind of output production we can get from this 330 watt panel from Pecron. It is got a voltage open circuit rating of 39.6 volts and a short circuit current rating of I think 12 amps. So it's very well suited for something like the Pecron E2000 LFP power station. And we're going to just kind of use that as our test and find out how much performance we can get out of this panel and how easy it is to set up and take down. So let's do that. All right, so this panel has a nice, really nice heavy gauge, long MC4 cable on it. I've got my MC4 adapter to the 5-pin aviation for the Pecron 2000 already attached to it. Right now, in terms of the surface of this panel, this is that very durable pebbled ETFE coated surface. So extremely durable. This is going to hold up very well in the elements. And as you can see, it is a 4-panel design. I did wrestle with it just a little bit deploying it. Usually that is normal for the first time. And once you kind of figure out what the optimal sequence is, it gets a little easier each time you do it. But yeah, anyway, you got a feel for what the initial wrestling match looked like. It's not too bad. All right, so I actually have this aligned slightly ahead of where the sun is going to be in the next half hour. So it'll probably be another 30 minutes or so before it's perfectly aligned. You can see we're at 3% charge on this E2000. And like I mentioned, we're just before noon. And I think we've got enough clear sky without any rain in the forecast that I can just leave this out. So let's see how far we can get with the daylight we have left in the day. All right, it has been only about 45 minutes and the sky conditions have changed significantly. We are now predominantly overcast. Let's just see if we're getting anything input right now. We're pulling in 57 watts. Got to check the radar, make sure we're not going to get any rain. I'm not worried about the panel, but I don't want to leave this E2000 out in the rain. The panel would be fine. So anyway, we'll check back. All right, it has been just about 6 hours, and we've really had intermittent sun today. So we went from, I think, what was it, 3% to 27%. So just about a quarter of a charge. But maybe if we have a chance here before I finish the video, I'll run another test on this when we have pretty much consistent sun and see what we do. All right, we are getting a little bit earlier start today. It's 9:45, so we lost a little bit of the morning sun, but you can see we do have mostly sunny skies instead of mostly cloudy skies. So we're going to see what kind of difference that makes today with this 330 watt panel. You can see right now I don't have the panel fully aligned, so I'm kind of I got it aligned where the sun will be in about an hour, but you can see we've got about 220 watts input already, which is already fairly good. That's about 2/3 of the rated output, and we're at 27%. So we're going to kind of just leave this up today and see how much further we can get. Maybe we can top this thing off. So we'll check back and find out at the end of the day. All right, it is just a little after 5 o'clock p.m. and we have had pretty much a full day here of pretty decent sun. You can see we've still got some clouds in the sky, but I think for the most part I would say we had mostly kind of an 80% sunny kind of a day, and we are fully topped off. Unfortunately, I didn't catch the peak output from this panel. I came out to look at it, I'm like, oh, we got really clear sun and it's already topped off. So I think 275 watts was about the peak that I observed on the initial connection, and yeah, so I suspect we got better than that at some point. I just wasn't out here to witness it. Yeah, one of the things that I wanted to point out on this is it's got this interesting sort of sliding leg design here to make this adjustable. And what that actually does that I didn't expect is that one of the things that you wrestle with these larger panels when you're trying to deploy them is that as soon as you unsnap the Velcro here on the end, they often lay themselves flat again as you're trying to expand the panel, and then you have to try to wrestle them back open. But this little design here allows you to kind of pull that down into place, and it keeps the leg from reattaching itself here to the Velcro pad on the bottom. And that does make deployment a little bit easier once you understand how these legs actually unfold. So it's kind of a clever design, and I think Pecron did a really nice job on this. Now, thankfully, I did get some decent sun that following day, so I spot checked the output on this, and I think 284 watts was the highest output that I happened to catch around noontime, I would say, and that's about 86% of the rated 330 watts. So that's a pretty decent number for March, and I suspect that I would probably easily get 90% output versus rated, something in that range anyway, during the summer months when the sun is a lot higher in the sky and doesn't have to come through as much atmosphere. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the open circuit voltage rating on this is 39.6 volts. So that means you definitely do not want to attach this to any power station that doesn't have at least a DC input max of about 40 volts or higher. So definitely be aware of that and check your power station's manual to be sure. And don't just rely on the listed maximum solar input watt rating, because that's only part of the spec that you need to consider, and definitely not as important as the voltage. Because if you put a panel that inputs more voltage than that power station can handle, you are very likely to damage that power station's charge controller. So you definitely don't want to do that. Now, if you happen to have a Pecron power station or are thinking about buying one, this panel actually makes a really excellent matchup for most of the models in the Pecron line. So for example, one of these would be a perfect matchup for either the Pecron E600 LFP, which I also did a video on, put a link up there if you want to check it out, or the E1000 Pro power station. Or if you're looking at something like the E1500 Pro, you could put two of these panels in parallel on that. And on the E2000 LFP or the E3000 power stations, you could put two of these in parallel on each of the two imports on those power stations. And that would allow you to max out that 1200 watt total solar input for these power stations, allowing you to optimize the solar input even when the sky conditions aren't ideal. And in sunny conditions, you could fully charge this guy from 0 to 100% in about 2 hours or fully charge the E2000 and an expansion battery in just under a full day. All right, so some final thoughts. I really am impressed with the quality construction on this panel. The setup is actually pretty straightforward. It took me a couple times to figure out the easiest way to do it. And that leg stand design on the panel actually makes it quite easy once you kind of get the feel for how they work. And the panel's heft actually makes it pretty stable, even in a fair amount of wind. So that's always helpful because a lot of times you're using this in places where it gets pretty windy. I also appreciate that super long heavy gauge cable, which enables you to put your power station in the shade oftentimes while the panel stays in the sun. And so yeah, I think this is a very nice alternative to having to manage a couple of 200 watt panels, for example, and especially if you have the Pecron E2000 LFP or maybe the E3000. This is a perfectly spec'd panel to enable you to maximize the solar input on those particular power stations, even when the sun conditions aren't perfect. So anyway, if you found any of this information helpful at all, please consider hitting that like button for me. I would really appreciate that. And if you haven't already checked out some of my other videos on this channel, I do a variety of reviews on a variety of topics and some DIY topics as well. And maybe you'll find something helpful there. Either way, thanks for joining me on this one, and I do hope you'll stop by for the next one. Until then, have fun out there. You are very likely to damage that power station's charge control. You are very likely to